but I think it's always like a mix of something. I think I went from being vegan or vegetarian to eating meat, and maybe that was too big of a change. On top of that, I had some sort of cough that lasted months, and I'm not sure if that was like a bacteria, a virus, or something like that, but I think a combination of I had a really bad cough, changed my diet, things like that. Maybe I was stressed because I was in school. So yeah, I think it's always, or sometimes a combination of things. So it's really hard to pinpoint. And that's one of those frustrating things with autoimmune survivors is like, what was that one thing that I did? But it's so hard to figure out what that is.
Before we get started, I want to tell a personal story about my mom and Lifeline Screening. You may have heard me talk about my mom's peripheral arterial disease diagnosis about 5-10 years ago. And I wanted to let you guys know how we found out about it. She's not a doctor-y kind of girl, and she has white coat syndrome. So it was very challenging for us to get her tested for different cardiac issues. So I got a postcard in the mail about Lifeline Screening, and I went ahead and contacted them and brought her to basically like a pop-up, which was at a church, a local church. And she went in, and it was very quick and easy. She didn't seem to be super nervous about it. There were a lot of people milling around, and they found the peripheral arterial disease, sent us a report. We went to the cardiologist, started using diet and nutrition and exercise therapy to treat it. And I've since gone to the Lifeline screenings myself, as well as my other family members, because it was super cost effective, keeping us from having to pay multiple copays and travel time and things like that. So Lifeline Screening is offering 5 preventive health screenings for a special price for my audience of $149. The package includes a carotid artery screening, abdominal aortic aneurysm screening, atrial fibrillation, which is also called AFib screening, peripheral arterial disease, PAD, which is what my mom was screened for, and osteoporosis screening. In addition, you can add other options like liver and kidney function and the A1C marker, which is for diabetes. So I can't encourage you enough to check it out. It's well worth it. It's going to save you a lot of time. It's painless. And you can click on my show notes in order to get the offer for $149, or you can call 844-558-0996 to schedule your appointment. That's 844-558-0996. Well, I'd like to welcome everyone to A Modern Healer's Journey. My name is Tammy Bennett, and I'm a doctor of Oriental medicine in practice in Central Florida. And I am joined today with the host of a podcast called Flora Funga. Her name is KK, and she and I met at PodFest 2023, and it was a wonderful event. I happened to sit down next to her, and we just struck up a conversation, and she told me about some health struggles that she had. So introduce yourself and tell the audience about your health struggles and what we discussed that day.
Yeah, hi. So I'm KK, and again, host of Flora Funga Podcast, but also I love health and fitness and wellness. And we kind of talked about at PodFest my arthritis journey. And so it was one of those struggling moments where you have some specific flare-ups or pains and you have no idea what they are and where they came from. And it took so long to get like the diagnosis about it. But yeah, after a few years of battling with certain symptoms, I finally got diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis. And ever since then, I've been really serious about kind of doing specific diet change, lifestyle change, exercise change. And so I think we kind of started covering that at PodFest.
Yeah, I have a lot of clients that come with autoimmune conditions to me. And part of what I hear people say is initially my doctor just wasn't looking in the right place. Mm-hmm. Did you go through that too? Like you went to a primary, I assume?
Yeah.
Your primary doctor was like, well, let's look here. Did they start off just with simple blood work?
Yeah, so my first symptom was I had feet pain, and I was doing, when you sign up for like a free week of yoga at some place. So I did one of those, and I was like, I'm going to get all of my time with this week. So I did one class or multiple classes for the whole week, and I was like, wow, my feet are really sore. Like my feet really hurt. So I was like, oh, maybe I just like did too much workout that day or something like that. So I didn't even think that it was an autoimmune issue. I actually thought I had, I don't even know what feet things are, but
like tendonitis or something.
Yeah, they were like, oh, maybe you have this, maybe you have this. And so I tried to put inserts into my shoes, and nothing was really helping. I'd get out of bed and like, it would be so painful to walk. And I think the analogy that doctors use is like you're walking on marbles. And so that's kind of where I was like, oh, that's definitely how I feel.
Yeah.
And so again, I think we started to do blood work. But nobody really took it seriously until the summer before, and I actually started different like fad diets. So I did keto, and I was trying to do like other Mediterranean diets, things like that. And I found out that keto is actually the worst thing because I have a dairy intolerance. So I was eating and consuming way more dairy than I should have, and I was having terrible flare-ups. I would have to call into work because for some reason I couldn't lift my arm at all. I couldn't open my wrist if I was using it all day the day before. And so I was like, hey, I am calling into work, and that should not be a thing. Like, what's actually wrong with me? We did some blood tests, and I think my RA factor was like 250, and it's supposed to be like under 10 or something like that. So it was something wild, and they're like, oh, all right, we get it. Exactly.
And do you have any idea what started it all, like where it came from? Is there something in your mind that you feel like here's where it began and this is where my journey is?
Yeah, that's one of those things that keep me up late at night where it's like, oh, if I only like changed this, or like I regret doing this. But I think it's always like a mix of something. I think I went from being vegan or vegetarian to eating meat, and maybe that was too big of a change. On top of that, I had some sort of cough that lasted months, and I'm not sure if that was like a bacteria, a virus, or something like that, but I think a combination of I had a really bad cough, changed my diet, things like that. Maybe I was stressed because I was in school. So yeah, I think it's always, or sometimes a combination of things. So it's really hard to pinpoint. And that's one of those frustrating things with autoimmune survivors is like, what was that one thing that I did? But it's so hard to figure out what that is.
I remember my stepmother when my dad passed away about 23 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember being with my stepmom, and just, it was a very sudden thing when my dad passed. And a couple months later, when I was on the phone with her, she goes, I was just diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis. I have to go through this treatment. I think she was doing Remicade and methotrexate, which are two heavy duty drugs. And she was complaining about how painful it was. And I asked her, I said, I don't ever remember you having anything like that. She goes, no, after your dad passed away, I think the stress kicked it into high gear, and I just couldn't handle the stress. Mm-hmm. And I've heard that a lot from different people, that an emotional trauma or a physical trauma precedes the flare-up, and then the flare-up comes.
Yeah.
So when you ended up changing your diet to help your body heal from the rheumatoid, did you do the elimination diet? Is that what happened?
Yeah, so that was one of my saviors as well. Before I even started the elimination diet, I did a sugar-free diet, and that was the most eye-opening thing ever. Just like only doing natural sugars, like fruit and like green apples, green bananas, things like that. And I was like, whoa, my brain fog is gone. My body feels good. I can sleep. I'm like, my libido's up. Like, this is crazy. I had no idea that it hits all of these things life-changing.
Yeah. And what's interesting is a lot of people don't realize simple things have sugar in it that you take for granted like ketchup or, just things in a box that you
Yes.
don't realize have sugars.
Yes.
How did you overcome that? Did you just eat mostly all natural stuff and nothing in a box?
Yeah, so you kind of start with processed foods or unprocessed foods, so like whole foods. And so that actually is where I went from being more vegan. And then I was looking at this book of how to eliminate more sugars. And it's kind of like, well, you don't get beans, you don't get carbs, you don't get noodles, you don't get. And I was like, wow, okay, so I have to like start eating protein. But at the same time, I was also really into the fitness thing. So I was starting my weightlifting journey, and I just saw huge benefits with having animal protein, eggs, things like that, to actually build muscle better and more efficient. So yeah, I definitely switched up those and went with whole foods.
And was that mostly like paleo for you?
Um, yeah, I guess I didn't really think about what paleo was at the time. I guess I just kind of did eliminating the simple sugars. And before I was laughing because there's so many times where people are like, oh yeah, I'm taking sugar out of my diet. And then they go get Starbucks and they don't realize that like getting a chai tea has like all of the like 30 grams of sugar. And they're like, oh, I didn't really realize. And reading the ingredients is how I started also being more aware. And vegan vegetarians totally get that because you have to look at all ingredients like those potato chips. The wavy ones have like whey in them, and you're like, why is there dairy in this? It's just chips.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah.
So how did you hack did you go through sugar detox? Were you like, ah?
Yeah, so I definitely did the sugar-free thing, and then I think, you just kind of get off the wagon, you kind of just follow the American diet that everybody else is following, so it's not fair that you are the one who has to do it. But then figuring out the elimination diet, because there's other secret things like nightshades don't agree with me, peanuts don't agree with me, dairy, like I was saying. So you always think that these like healthier diets are better, but it is very individual. So when I learned that I had the dairy intolerance, the peanuts, tomatoes, for some reason almonds make my feet hurt. So I was thinking back when my first initial pain, and I was eating almond butter all the time. And then so that's why I was like, whoa, that's crazy that healthy foods aren't always the best for certain people.
I've met a lot of vegans that aren't very healthy and I try to persuade them to change, but that sometimes that emotional attachment to being vegan and being vegan for different reasons. Some people it's about animal welfare. Some people it's about health and wellness. Some people, just have a very different way of, reasoning for doing that. But I find that when you gently do things differently, like change a few things at a time, it's not as dramatic. Did you end up doing allergy testing at all, like allergy blood work as well?
Yeah, well, I didn't do allergy blood work, but my partner actually bought me one of those like food sensitivity tests, and that came back with me being sensitive to, I think, chicken and egg whites. And actually, I think egg whites is one of my sensitivities. But I think those work like if you've eaten those foods in that time frame of like 90 days or whatever the time is, then it will show up. So if you haven't been eating these foods, they actually don't show up on the test. So it's kind of like the best way to figure out your trigger foods is the elimination diet. For some reason, that's like the gold star way of doing it right now.
Got it. So at PodFest, you explained to me that you are a podcaster and Flora Funga is your podcast.
Yeah.
Tell me about your background, your education, your history, and why you decided to start a podcast of that nature.
Yeah. When I was younger, I loved plants. I would, every time I was bribed, obviously, as a kid, to do like violin lessons or something like that. And in exchange, I would get workbooks, which were just like animal booklets where you'd learn about animals, you'd learn about plants. And that just like lit me up. Like my mom was telling me the story the other day of when I got my first book when I was younger, I'd open it and just like kiss it. because I
Oh,
just loved books so much. And I was like, wow, I don't even know if I knew how to read, but let's do it. And yeah, growing up, I would love going to greenhouses. I'd pick all of those little like succulent petals off of the ground and like take them home. And I actually got yelled at by my neighbor once because I went over to his yard and clipped all of the tulips off because they just looked so pretty. I wanted to just take them home and give them to my mom. And she was like, oh my gosh, you have to go back and apologize. And so like one of those things where it's so
I'm
pretty.
glad she didn't tell you to tape them back up.
Yeah, that'd be funny. And I also love climbing trees. Like I just loved all animal stuff, all plant stuff. Then I got into college and I didn't really remember that past. I kind of wanted to be a coroner. I kind of wanted to be a vet. I kind of wanted to be, other things. So I got into Mankato as a biochemist. Silly. And then one of the prereqs was taking a plant biology class. And I took that class and I fell in love with the content. I fell in love with the professor, the way he just articulated, and it just seemed so easy and fun. And so I was like, why wouldn't I do this? And I remember the first day going to college, I saw a greenhouse there, and I was like, I'm going to get myself into there. I don't care what it takes. I'm going to get in there. Right. And after the second course, we got to go into the greenhouse, and I was like, all right, well, I guess I'm here to stay because it sold me automatically. So yeah, I really loved the plant biology side. I visited my grandparents. They live in northern Wisconsin. And I was just driving around and I saw this huge mushroom over there. And I was like, what is that? So I pull up and it's this huge amanita. And so if people don't know what the amanita is, it's like the toadstool, the red and white. Yes, the Christmas mushroom. And so I just got on the ground, took like a photo shoot with it. And then I realized how connected plants and fungi are just because they communicate underneath the ground. If anybody has seen Fantastic Fungi on Netflix, it talks all about that. And yes. So the interconnected web of plants and fungi, I just set off into this for my major. And also I love podcasts. I was looking up if there was any other podcasts that kind of talked about the physiological or the physiology of plants and fungi, and I didn't see anything. There's tons of houseplant talk. There's tons of like mushroom stuff, but I never saw the connection or both in a podcast before. And then actually Buzzsprout released a podcast on how to make a podcast. And so I actually went through that and I was like, fuck, I could make my own podcast because people create books on what they would want to read. And so I created a podcast on what I wanted to listen to. And so, yeah.
Back in college, when you were doing the work, did you have a specific niche that you found yourself in? Was it mushrooms specifically?
Yes. Okay. Back, I guess it was about 5 years ago now. But before, when I was doing plant biology, my plant biology degree, I always tried to tie it back into mushrooms a little bit. Just we would have to do a mock proposal, and I actually did how corn has this specific fungus. And so I found out that none of my professors really knew about mushrooms. So it was kind of fun to always make a presentation on mushrooms or fungi because they had no idea what I was talking about. So they couldn't really ask anything. Right. But they were always very excited and saw my passion for it. Gotcha. So I definitely always tried to combine them together or just talked about mushrooms in general.
And do you have a greenhouse of your own? Do you grow?
I used to when I had a balcony. I had that little, just, wee wide, and I would do some seedlings in there. I'd put some plants in there. right now I am living in Florida, and I'm actually in my mom's lanai, and so we got tons of plants here. One of the saddest things when I had to move from Minnesota here is I had to leave all my plants behind except for one peace lily, which is from my grandma's funeral. So I got to keep that one, and I gave the other ones to my friends. So it was a sad thing to leave them behind.
Do you forage in the forest at all here?
Yeah, actually, so in Minnesota, I definitely knew some spots for like morels and things like that. I just moved to Florida in November, so I'm still kind of looking around for where I can forage. But one of my upcoming interviews is actually with Alan Rockefeller, and he actually has some family here in Florida. So hopefully we'll do some foraging next month for glow-in-the-dark mushrooms, which I've heard are around here.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I don't even know about glow-in-the-dark mushrooms, but I had a client who was an avid forager, and he used to go to the Wekiva Springs here.
Okay.
So I will send you some information about Wekiva Springs and get some information from him. He used to take his, he had two beautiful miniature huskies that he would take with him, and they would go foraging for hours and hours and hours.
Gosh.
So I'll get you the hot spots that he was telling me about. So in the world of mushrooms, you know, there's mushrooms that we eat for their taste. There are mushrooms that are medicinal, and then there are mushrooms that are psychedelic. So do you want to give us a little breakdown of how that happens in the mushroom world?
Yeah. So I was actually just talking to my partner about how there's multiple psychedelic mushrooms, and we were just kind of like, did they all kind of start together? Did they branch off from each other? But I think they all start individually, just because I think they have, I guess, what would you call it? A way to stop herbivores or stop animals from eating them is to put them in this psychedelic state, I guess. And so, yeah, it's really interesting how the toadstool, the Amanita, is psychoactive, but also poisonous. So in specific quantities, it kind of happens with each. But yeah, there's tons of different psychedelic mushrooms out there, which is really interesting. And then sometimes the culinary ones actually are also the medicinal ones, which is perfect. And that's like lion's mane. And so that one is just like a really tasty mushroom to me. But also it's also for brain health. And I think you also use it with your people that you work with. So that's just like one of those magic mushrooms, quote unquote, right now, because it's just so beneficial. And I think it's doing real good right now.
Yeah, in traditional Chinese medicine, the lion's mane is used mostly for digestive problems, and it acts on the stomach channel. So that's something that I'm real familiar with. And I'm pretty sure that this whole new mushroom craze going on in the world, as far as, you know, like mellow, medicinal, this, that, and the other, you know, the coffee industry has really like amped up this whole lion's mane thing. Yeah. So I think it's really interesting that this is not going to end anytime soon. I think there are going to be more popular mushrooms showing up than ever before. In traditional Chinese medicine, it's 5,000 years worth of pharmacopoeia. I mean, I've got books like this thick that talk about all different types of herbs, and mushrooms are, you know, always there. I want to go back to the three different kinds. So if there's the psychedelic, and then there's the medicinal. Yep. And the edible, as far as like good for flavor in food, what makes the food type of mushroom, like a button mushroom or a what's the other one, morel? Okay, what makes them edible versus medicinal? Like how does that? Is there something inside the mushroom or in the soil or where it's grown that makes that happen?
Yeah, so that's a great question.
I'm asking you because you're the expert. You tell me, where does that happen?
Yeah, no, that's it's interesting because all of them kind of have beta glucans, which is something that is helpful for like health and other like brain function, digestion, things like that. But yeah, it's weird that not a lot of the mushroom pair up with like the edible versus medicinal. So like shiitake, for example, is also medicinal, but also has a really good flavor. I'm not sure how that actually works, like how there was like a separate entity of having, oh, maybe we'll just focus on taste. Oh, maybe we'll just focus on medicinal, because there's usually a lot of like combination or overlapping aspects to them. So yeah, that's really interesting how like mushrooms just kind of have their own thing. So yeah, I'm not quite sure what exactly makes them more tasty or more medicinal. But yeah, that's interesting, just because reishi is one of those examples where it's very medicinal, but it's like hard as a rock. So you can't just like eat on it. You gotta brew it into a tea, things like that. So
Yeah, and who was the first person that decided, hey, I'm going to take this rocky tasting looking thing and brew it up and see what happens to it, you know?
Exactly. And like the amanita, like who thought of like eating it and then peeing it out and then drinking somebody's pee and then being like, oh, now we can trip. Like the other way we'll just die, and this way we'll just trip. How do you how do you go
how many people sacrificed themselves before they figured it out, right?
Probably so many, but worth it.
That's so funny. So let's talk about cordyceps.
Yeah.
So cordyceps is one that I use for immune boosting all during COVID. Everybody was asking me like, can you get the medicinal mushrooms? Can I take a combination? Can you get a hold of it from your herbal people? And it's like, yep, I got you covered.
Yeah.
So cordyceps, where does it grow?
Yeah, so cordyceps are popping off right now. They are like the zombie fungus that people are talking about. I'm not sure what the movie is. I actually haven't seen it. I think it's like Among Us or something like that. Is what
I think it's called The Last of Us, right?
The Last of Us. Thank you. The Last of Us is kind of what they base that movie off of. So yeah, cordyceps is, I think it's like 1,000 or more species that it actually grows on, but it can go from like caterpillars, ants, and now we can cultivate them in a lab, so they're not actually growing off of animals. So yeah, how that works is like a fungus gets into an ant and then actually somehow controls their muscle movements and walks them to perfect spreading conditions to where the mushroom can actually spread its spores. And then it's living inside this ant. So it actually kills the ant and then uses the nutrients and grows out of the insect itself. But first moves them to where the mushroom wants to be to spread these spores. And so it's crazy.
So could we theorize, and you can tell me if this is true or it's just theory, that mushrooms are intelligent?
Yes, I agree.
Okay. Because that requires some kind of intelligence to manipulate an animal to do something like that.
Yeah, it's wild. Like, I think the ant is aware of what's happening but can't physically do anything about it because it's in control of its motor functions. And then and then somehow convinces it to walk to like the top of the colony where it can turn into a mushroom and then spread the spores, and then it's spread to other ants and the process starts again. So it's just that's wild.
That's phenomenal. So how do they recreate that in a lab?
Yeah, so that's actually I'm not sure exactly how they do it, but I know that they have some sort of sample, and then I think they just grow that on a specific medium. And I think it's the Cordyceps Militaris is that specific species that can be grown in a lab. They're the one that's grown in the wild on ants and other caterpillars is actually a combination of other fungi. So they were trying to pinpoint it from the wild type, but they were getting so many different species of fungus on this one ant that they couldn't actually recreate it appropriately, because it would they'd redo this, get a different example, redo that, get a different fungus. So I think they finally figured out that Cordyceps militaris is the one that can be grown in the lab and can be reduced to just that one fungus.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Fascinating. We could do a whole thing
I know.
just that. But I'll go to the next one. So you mentioned shiitake.
Yeah.
And again, huge immune booster. It also has an anti-tumor effect.
Mm-hmm.
Delicious.
Yes.
Also.
And easy to grow.
So easy?
Easy to grow.
Okay, so tell me how easy it is.
Yeah, so I actually worked at a company called Forest to Fork, and we would grow shiitake logs in this like 30-foot humidor growing chamber. And so you would get kind of inoculated logs already. So there's tons of these grow kits around. It's easy to find the little dowels, I think you'd call it. So it's just kind of like compressed mycelium into a little peg, and you can use a real wood, so they like a lot of hardwood like oaks, and so you would drill holes into these logs and just kind of like pound these little dowels into them, cover them with wax, and you just set this log up in the shade and you just water it periodically, and within like 9 months you actually get shiitake growing from that log itself.
Nice.
Yeah. And
I like that.
Yeah.
With flowers and fungi, are there certain things that need to be next to one another that complement each other with the way that they taste or the way that they are filled with nutrients?
Are you asking like which trees or mycorrhizae connections do they need, or flowers specifically?
Yes. No, I should qualify my statement by saying other plants, flowers, and or trees. So are there interrelationships where fungi grow better or with other things?
Yeah, so I think the stat is like 98 or 96% of plants need a mycorrhizae symbiosis to actually like have its optimum growing. So yeah, there's tons of, that's why it's actually really hard to cultivate certain species. So like truffles, I think they're just learning how to grow those without the symbiosis, which is wild to me because you usually need a specific tree, a specific humidity, temperature, soil moisture, light, other plants. So it's really hard to pinpoint like the exact things to make the perfect morel, the perfect truffle, the perfect porcini, things like that. But other mushrooms like portobello, and other like edible ones, it's easier to cultivate just because we figured it out, I guess. But
in traditional Chinese medicine, in the food energetics portion of what I'm taught, we have to have certain things in combination to create balance. So I would assume that much like what I teach a patient about food when I tell them to eat, like bone broth and rice and certain foods that are warming to the body versus cooling to the body, it would be similar in nature where the nutrient effect, the highest amount of nutrient, the best density would be when the mushroom is actually grown alongside of those other nutritional plants and trees and such, to give it the best nutrition. And if it's possibly grown outside of that environment, it may lack certain nutrients. I would assume that might be the case.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That seems like it should be right up that alley. As well as you usually find plants with like a poison oak or a poison ivy. There's sometimes usually like the how would you say it, like the antidote that is grown next to it just in case. Right. So I've seen other examples of that, which is really fascinating too. Again, like plants are intelligent. They can ward off different things. They can signal to other insects to attack another insect that's actually inhibiting the growth of this plant. It's just like, it's crazy how interconnected the whole world is above and below the ground.
As above, so below. I've had
Yes.
people tell me that the last couple of weeks. It's like over and over in my head. So one of the things that was interesting, I used to work with a company that did CBD products.
Okay.
And inside the marijuana plant, you've got the antidote to the THC, which is the CBD.
Mm-hmm.
And people didn't realize that you had both aspects in one plant, or how many different molecules there actually are, or cannabinoids inside the plant and what they do. Some make you hungry, some make you not hungry. It's like this, it's a full microcosm.
Yes.
Within a single plant.
Yes.
And multiply that to, I'm looking outside right now. I'm looking at you. There's plants all around you. it's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
You can count the amount of, you can't count the amount of stars, universes, plants. It's mind-boggling that we're part of this whole system.
Agreed.
So to end our conversation, I wanted to ask you your stance on the psychedelic mushrooms, if you're pro psychedelic mushrooms for mental health, and what you think about all that.
Yeah, I am definitely pro psychedelics for mental health. I actually have a medical card myself, so I also do know a little bit about cannabis, and that's also where I find it frustrating, where people go into dispensaries and they're like, I want the highest THC possible, and I'm like, no, I really want my ratio of 1-to-1 or 19-to-1 of CBD to THC. And so it is wild that people just kind of want to get high, where there's so many other healing aspects to it, having like the ratios to decrease anxiety and other negative aspects that people think of cannabis as well.
Inflammation.
Yep. Yeah. So combining them is like actually how it's supposed to be and what the plant wanted as well. And yeah, but with the psychedelic mushrooms, or I guess like peyote, there's like mescaline, there's DMT, there's all of these other aspects. And I'm very pro trying a lot of things to help with mental health. Actually, my sister was going through that too, and she found mushrooms as well. And she actually got all off of her medications just because she found that was more helpful. And she hasn't had to go back just because she was like, wow, I didn't even know that I didn't need these things. And the doctor told me I needed that. But actually, I just needed this type of medicine, and found her own way. And so
I've had some clients that have had excellent success with that as well. Mm-hmm. I've had some family members that have been microdosing that have had excellent results. Mm-hmm. And it opens up a whole new world, because the negative effects of depression, anxiety disorder, it affects every single thing that a person does all day, every day. So to not have to take a pharmaceutical, and I know Big Pharma doesn't like that, but it is like what money. It is. We have a huge variety of plants on this planet, and we only probably know a fraction of what they can do. Mm-hmm. And if mushrooms, as they are, from what I understand, a reset for the brain, mm-hmm. if that gets somebody through and helps them have a productive life, I have no issue with that at all. Exactly. I'm hoping that the state of Florida will follow through with some of the other states in the country that have gone pro. I think you told me Colorado, and I want to say Oregon might have some really relaxed laws about that as well.
Yeah, and I know Canada, there's like shops where you can literally go in and get like mushroom chocolate or something, and it's like, whoa, that's cool. Vancouver, let's go.
Yeah, go Vancouver.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you so much. If you'll tell everybody how to get a hold of you so they can listen to your podcast, and if they want to converse with you about other things related to flora and fungi, how they can do that.
Yeah. So I'm on, I think, probably every social media out there, but I'm at Flora Funga Podcast on, I think, like Instagram, Facebook. I actually do weekly lives. I just started doing Sunday weekly lives on my Facebook page. And last week we actually talked about decriminalization of cannabis and psychedelic mushrooms. So that was a really cool turnout. So find me anywhere, Flora Funga Podcast.
Yeah, and I've got Flora Funga Podcast.com.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you.